Dave is the president and COO of Lucid Software. Raise your hand if you know Lucid Software. Should have seen their building. Yes, most everyone. Okay. Since joining Lucid in 2010, Dave has been responsible for expanding the product and business development teams, including the product management, marketing, sales, customer support, and operations. There's nothing this guy can't do, all right? Previously, Dave worked as a management consultant at Bain & Company after founding his own web-based platform. He graduated summa cum laude from BYU. It's a good time to be a BYU fan. Yeah? Cougars out there? Okay. With the BS in business management and currently serves as an independent board member at Bitly. So with that, Dave, come on up. Thank you for being here. Have a seat on the blue couch. Don't fall asleep, right?
All right. Excellent.
It's not a therapy session, right? I'm going to pull this chair up here just a little bit. You can move the pillows, too, if you need to.
All right.
Cool. Well, thanks for being here. Are you feeling the chi, Dave?
That got me pumped.
That was
pretty
cool,
exciting.
Huh?
Congratulations to all you who broke those boards.
You didn't know you'd be coming to RevRoad and breaking boards
That was
and
amazing.
bricks, right?
I feel like now this is kind of the letdown portion of the presentation.
No,
but
not at all. Not at all. This is the highlight. Dave, let's get started. So, you've started a lot of companies, and you've been around the block quite a few times. What was one of the first companies you started?
Well, I was probably at BYU. I started a couple different things when I was at BYU. First, when I came in as a freshman, for some reason I got an interest in collecting rare and old religious books. And I don't really know where that came from, but I started doing it.
Like what kind of books? I mean, religious, but what?
I mean, primarily, to deal with the local, predominant religion here.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
I was, predominantly collecting Book of Mormons,
Okay,
earlier
cool.
editions of that. And, I remember buying my first, I think it was a 1920, edition. It was not that early, but it cost me $50.
Wow.
And I thought, I can't believe I just spent $50 on a book, and I can't imagine ever spending any more than that.
What would that have been worth today?
It's probably not worth dramatically more, but probably over that time frame, maybe it's doubled.
Okay.
But I didn't have money to spend. But and so I had to figure out
it was like groceries for 2 months,
how do I fund
right?
this collection that I want to build over time. And so I started buying and collecting other religious books,
okay.
from bookstores, from DIs, from eBay, from people who didn't sort of fully understand, oftentimes, what they were selling. And I would put more historical context around it. I would have better pictures, better marketing. I'd understand the audience better. And so I was buying and selling, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars of religious books to ultimately fund my collection. So that was sort of one of my first, forays into entrepreneurial.
First moments of being scrappy.
That's right. That's right.
There you go.
I started another one later at BYU as well, which, back then we called them Web 2.0 businesses.
Okay.
That's no longer cool. But I'd had this part-time job during BYU, my time at BYU, where I was working with large family organizations. So there's family organizations, for pilgrims, right? The people who landed on the Mayflower, their descendants. There's large family organizations for people who helped, who were the early pioneers of Utah, for example. Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, some folks like that who actually have like 100,000 descendants. And so there's these organizations that exist, and my job was to essentially create a website and find photos and transcribe journals and do all these things, to sort of help bring these people to life. And I did that for a couple of years, and it was a big effort. And I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a way, I could help automate this for a lot of other people. And so, long story short, I raised money from what some people have called, friends, family, and fools, the 3 Fs, which was largely myself, my father, and my father-in-law, and started building this platform where people could automatically create, a website for their, larger family, invite others to sort of collaboratively share their photos, stories, journals, other things to sort of bring their family history to life.
Sounds like a precursor to a couple large companies out there now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot of interest in that area, and I got into it, and we launched a product. We started getting customers, but pretty quickly I realized I didn't know all that much yet, and it probably wasn't the right time for me to sort of fully jump in, and so ultimately I decided to go a different path, with starting off my career, and then hopefully come back, which I did.
Cool. So all while you were at BYU, you were kind of doing these things.
Yeah, it was just a lot of my side projects, and ultimately dipping my toe.
Awesome. Well, Dave, for those in the audience, I mean, most everyone knows what Lucid is, but give us if you were to meet someone on the street or in an elevator, what would you tell them that Lucid is?
Yeah. You know, at Lucid, we talk about our mission as helping teams see and build the future. And, you know, specifically, how do we do that? You know, it's with our visual collaboration platform. So we have a product called Lucidspark, which is a virtual whiteboard, you know, helps bring teams together to ideate, brainstorm together, and then synthesize those ideas, help the best ideas rise to the top together as a team. And then, you know, that leads into our second product, Lucidchart, where teams can come together to, you know, help design and document and develop the systems or the processes or the organizations, you know, that are required to ultimately bring that idea to reality. So that visual collaboration platform, again, helps teams see, you know, what they need to really understand their business, what may need to change, and then help them act on those ideas to bring them to reality.
Very cool. And in our previous conversations, you talked about how the pandemic even helped one of those products even more than normal, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the last 18 months now have been an interesting time for all of us. And, you know, part of that major shift has been all of a sudden people had to figure out how to collaborate better. In many ways, we're not actually that good at collaborating, especially when we're not in the same room together. We got pretty good pretty fast at how do we communicate when we're not in the same room together, right? We can pull up a Zoom, and there's all sorts of issues with that we could talk about. But the collaboration is different, right? It's how do we really help that creativity come together, even when we're not physically together. And so all of a sudden, people started looking for more of those ways to do that. And our visual collaboration platform with Lucidchart, Lucidspark, was in the right place, right time to sort of help a lot of teams do that, better as they were transitioning to that remote or hybrid workforce.
Awesome. So overnight success that took 12 years, but really was ramped up with the pandemic.
That's right. That's right. We'll always take advantage of the trends, but I think it's a great point. Building a company takes a long time. I think you look at a lot of the great success stories in Utah and more generally, and they feel like overnight successes, or all of a sudden it feels like they came out of nowhere and now they're doing tremendously well. But you actually look back at the history, you talk to the founders of those, and these were often decade-long journeys or 15-year journeys or longer. And I think sometimes that's one of the things we forget.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Dave. Well, what was your task or what was your job role when you first joined the Lucid team?
At the time, Carl, who's our CEO, called me and said, we've got a great product called Lucidchart, but we need someone to come help us figure out and grow the business. So great product, but we need the business side, to go with it. And that was as much of a job description as I've ever gotten in my 10 years at Lucid.
Little vague, right?
A little vague, but that was okay. And so, I came on board, and there were a couple of things that I realized really quickly. One, Carl said to me on Monday, he said, well, we need pricing. I think up until that point, we had a PayPal button to donate or something on the website, but we need something real. And I was coming from, a consulting firm where I'd literally just spent 4 months on a pricing case. And so I thought, I know how to do this. And at this, consulting firm, I'd run complex surveys and run all sorts of analysis. And so I thought I was prepared to do this. And then on Wednesday, Carl said, well, what do you have for us? And I thought, okay, this is a different time. I said, give me till Friday. I'm just wrapping up some things. And so very quickly had to figure out, well, what is our pricing, right? How do we take, this product to market? And then from there, once we had that foundation established, it was really around how do we get people, to know about us, right? A great product is only so great, if no one knows about it. And so a lot of my original efforts were, building that top of funnel. Because early on, Carl had come from Google. Carl had joined Google relatively early, a few hundred employees, at the time, and had stayed there for a long time. And so I remember being in the basement with Carl, and we were talking about, how should we approach, the business? How should we approach growth? And, coming from Google, he had this, perspective that you don't build a product unless it can be built for 1 billion or more users. And I thought, that's great. But we also need to make money. And so we sort of, had this back and forth conversation around what is the balance between users, and revenue. But nonetheless, at its core, we had this vision from very early on that essentially every knowledge worker, should and could be using, Lucidchart at the time and visual collaboration more broadly.
So how did you meet with Carl, or how did you meet Carl the first time? I don't know if I remember that story.
So Carl's actually my brother-in-law.
Okay.
So
All right.
he married my oldest sister. They met at Harvard Law School, and so I knew Carl as a teenager. And I think the story goes that Carl and Ben, his co-founder, knew they needed someone to come help grow the business. And Carl told him, "I think I know someone who would be great, but there's no way I'm calling him." And Ben said, "Why?" He said, "Well, he's my brother-in-law, and I'm not doing the family thing because that's so cliche, and there could be all sorts of issues with that." And eventually, Ben convinced him to call me, which obviously I'm glad he did. And it's worked out really well. 10 years now of working together, and it's been a great journey.
No family challenges or drama or anything.
Well, we try to separate too much business talk at Thanksgiving and all those sort of things. But I remember actually a month after I joined. We went to a conference, and it was run by Google Ventures, and there was a legendary sort of tech executive coach, Bill Campbell, who was speaking, and this is someone who had worked with the early Google founders and others, and he was talking about recruiting and hiring, and he was saying to the audience, there's a few mistakes you can't make. First, you can't go out and hire these consultants. These people who've worked at Bain and McKinsey, they're too pie in the sky. They don't actually know how to get work done. They're not the right kind of people to recruit to an early stage business. So I sat there, I was next to Carl and Ben thinking, okay, one strike. He said, the second thing you can't do is you can't hire family. Your brother-in-law might need a job, but you cannot hire your brother-in-law. And I thought, okay, 2 strikes. I was waiting for the 3rd strike, but fortunately he stopped there and moved on.
That's great. Do you feel, and this is a little bit off script, but do you feel that going back and working at Bain and doing the consulting thing for a while, was that helpful in your entrepreneur journey after that?
It really was. And I think my plan was to graduate from BYU and be an entrepreneur, right? Start a business or continue the business I was running. But given that sort of early experience that I had, I wanted to go to Bain because I thought it'd give me sort of broad perspective on a lot of different businesses and industries, give me a general sort of business context. Ultimately what I took from Bain when I came to Lucid was a couple of things. One, great analytical foundation, which was helpful for all sorts of things. And two, at Bain in that kind of career, they try to teach you how to break down ambiguous problems into hypotheses, into things you can go solve. And that's pretty helpful coming to a startup, because essentially a startup is a collection of really hard, ambiguous problems that you have to figure out day by day. How do I break this down? How do I actually tackle this? And so on. And the analytical portion certainly played into that. So it was absolutely the right decision for me to sort of take that path, but I definitely am not too prescriptive on what the right path is for everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. So you're at Lucid, you're with your brother-in-law, Carl, things are going well, the company's growing like crazy. Was there one decision that kind of changed the trajectory of everything where things just started exploding as you look back on it?
I've been asked that question a lot, and the answer, I think, for us is no, right? I don't think that there was any single inflection point where all of a sudden things were clicking, things were humming, we saw a dramatic overnight, growth that we weren't seeing before. I mean, for us, I think it was just this collection of all these micro decisions, right? Hiring this person, hiring that person, doing the pricing this way, this marketing decision, forming this partnership, but day in and day out, just sort of grinding through it. I don't think that there was any single one moment that I look back on and say, that was it, or that was the moment that I knew Lucid was going to be big. I think it was sort of this constant, evolution, and being willing to come in and day out, and keep grinding with the team that you trusted.
So, and I'm sure no one in this audience can relate with that, right? The day in, day out slog, right? But that's comforting to know that it doesn't necessarily have to be one point where things just take off. Maybe it's just a constant uphill growth battle, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. Love that. So, Dave, we've heard some of the great things and some of the cool things. What were some of the challenges that you faced in the early years of Lucid?
Yeah, I think 2 things generally come to mind, and these are probably going to sound familiar, to people here. And that, I would say, is recruiting and fundraising, right? I mean, recruiting, it's challenging.
No one has a problem with recruiting, right? Nobody?
Yeah, especially in this market, right? This is one of the toughest markets, I think, ever to recruit. And the bar, of course, is even higher for us when we're running early stage startups, because you have to find someone who's just enough crazy, to say no to the 4 other kind of more stable offers that they have, and go in with you because they believe in your vision. That's hard. And it was, it was definitely true at Lucid as well. In those early days, part of it was, Carl came with this perspective from Google, which I really appreciate, which is we hire great people. We do not settle. And that was hard at times. I remember, I was burned out. It was a couple years into the journey. We'd hired more people on the technical side, but I was still alone on the business side. And it was time that we needed someone. I was running marketing. I was answering every support ticket, doing a wide variety of things. And I remember, we finally interviewed a good candidate, and who was interested in Lucid, who was willing to jump on, and the interview was fine. And afterwards, Carl asked me, "Well, is he good or is he great?" And I said, "Well, he's good. He's available now, and I need someone." And that was the wrong answer, And so Carl and I had a further discussion, but we ultimately decided to pass on that candidate. And, a few weeks or a couple months later, we ended up hiring that person who was awesome, who was truly great, who was very different than me, brought a different perspective, different skill set, grew with the company for the next few years. But it's hard. It's hard to hold out, for truly great. It's hard to, find those people who believe in your vision. But I fundamentally believe, that initial core nucleus of people you build together sort of sets the tone from there. Because we got to this point where it was hard, but the initial core nucleus of people we hired at Lucid were truly fantastic. And they were not only great at what they did, but they were great people. And we got to this point where it started finally, started slowly to snowball, right? Those great people made it easier to attract other great people. Whereas I think if that initial nucleus of people is good, you will attract other good people. If that initial nucleus is fine, you'll attract other fine people. And so, putting so much effort, I think, into those first few hires is key, but painful. So that's on the the recruiting side. I'd say on the fundraising side as well. Again, it's hard to get people to fully believe in your vision a lot of times, and that was certainly true at Lucid. So this was 2010, early 2011. We went out to raise our seed round, and we met with everyone in Utah at the time, and no one bid. Not a single investor, in Utah at the time was excited to back Lucid for our seed round.
This was a little bit before the Silicon Slopes era and that sort of thing, right?
Totally. It was a fundamentally different time. I mean, at the time, 2010, there were a couple, different things going on, and Qualtrics was just starting to come from kind of out from under the covers, but, it was a very different ecosystem than it is now. Today's ecosystem is amazing in Utah and Silicon Slopes, and there's kudos to go around on that one. But at the time, it was challenging. And so, we had to go piece together a round from investors in California primarily. $20,000 check here, $50,000 check here. It was a lot of angel investors, small seed funds, piecing together over months that first round. Even from there, it didn't get that much easier. A few years later, we went out to raise our Series A. We'd become, break-even profitable, and so we were in, control of our own destiny, but we wanted to accelerate. We wanted to invest more, and so we went to go raise a Series A. And again, it was hard. I remember sitting with one of the investors who'd passed on our seed round, and we were, $3 million in revenue at the time. And these investors asked me, "Do you really believe that this can be 3x the business it is today?" And in that moment, I didn't quite know how to react, and so I just laughed. I actually just laughed at, and I think told them, of course this can, and here's all the reasons why. And left that meeting, and I thought, well, that didn't go very well. They called me later that day and said, that meeting was sort of really changed for us when you started laughing, because we realized we were missing something that was so obvious to you, but was not clear to us. Now, I don't suggest laughing in all of your investor meetings, but it was the right thing at the right time, right? For us. But it didn't get that much easier. But one of the interesting things for us at Lucid, and I think this is true for a lot of companies, a lot of the people who passed on our seed round invested in our Series A round. A lot of the people who passed on like our Series B led our Series C, right? And so, even though it was hard, we continued to develop the relationships, and we continued to day in and day out show that and deliver upon what we said we were going to, so that when we came back a couple of years later, we could show them that progress and say, this is going to happen. This is our vision. We're making progress toward it. We really want you to be a part of this, and why. And here's why. Are you in? But it took a lot of effort.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing that with us. Going back to the recruiting side just a little bit. So A players, right? That's all you're looking for at Lucid. And I know a lot of companies here, same story, right? What did you do to recruit those A players, especially in the early days? Was it compensation? Was it equity? What was the whole thing that you used to do that?
Yeah, well, in the early days, you don't have a lot of compensation to go around, right? And so, I think a lot of it came down to culture. I remember when we were relatively small and we were expecting a lot of growth ahead, Carl and I started meeting with a few CEOs and other founders who were a couple of steps ahead of us. And so what should we be thinking about in the coming year or two? And at the time, I was running the marketing. I was running the business side of this. I was hoping that I would get some great tips on how to double revenue the next year. And invariably, everyone came back and said, culture. And at the time, I admit, I was a bit of a skeptic, right? This was early days in Lucid, and I was very much an analytical person. This felt very soft, but nonetheless, we went through some of the, a little bit of formalized motion to say, well, what is our culture? What are our core values? And so we sat down with the core members of that team in an offsite one day, and we went through this process and really formalized what we wanted our culture, what was our culture today that we sort of really appreciated, and what did we want it to continue, for the years ahead. And that was one of the key pivotal moments, because, walking out of there, we didn't just paint it on a wall or put it on the website, but we really tried to operationalize it. And really that came to recruiting, right? We said every person has to meet these core values, right? No matter how fantastic we think they are, if they don't sort of align with who we are and who we want to be, that's not going to be the right fit. And that's a hard decision, especially when you find, that A player who, could transform your marketing or could transform your sales or could be a key product leader or engineer. And you have to say, I don't think so.
Sorry, no thanks, but thanks, right?
That's right.
Okay. What was the probably one of the most memorable lessons you had while scaling Lucid? And in our pre-conversation, you talked a little bit about a Facebook article and things like that. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple different parts to this. I mean, one is lessons about scaling the business, and then there's also lessons about scaling yourself. Because one of the things that I, realized somewhat early on, and then appreciated more over time, is that a lot of founders, a lot of early executives, a lot of early employees don't necessarily scale well with the business. And as a result, they either choose to exit or they are exited. And I didn't want that to be, sort of my path at Lucid.
That's not a fun.
That's not the path I wanted, right?
And
And not to say it's not the right path, right? There are some people who love those initial, who love different stages of business, right? Maybe they love being that initial sort of founder and idea person, and so they get through that stage and they build it to a point, they want to go back and do it again. That's fantastic, right? But I think as that early employee or executive or founder, you want that optionality, right? You don't want that to be thrust upon you. And so, I remember, I'm a generalist. I had no specific skill sets coming into, to Lucid. I was not a marketer. I was not a salesperson. I was not a product person. And so I started learning as much as I could, really quickly. But as we scaled, there were these interesting pivotal moments where I realized that more was needed than what I could give to Lucid, right? If we really wanted to achieve that vision that I talked about earlier, I wasn't going to be the person in that seat who could do it. And so, for example, I built our marketing for our first 4 or 5 years, and we were successful, right? We attracted millions of users. We were growing quickly. All these sort of different things. But we got to this point when I realized if we really want to get to where we want to go, We need someone who actually understands branding and positioning and messaging, and how to take this to market in a different way, to enterprise. And those were not skill sets that I really had. And so, Carl and I talked about it. We decided we need to hire a CMO. And we did. And we found a fantastic CMO, 5 years ago, who's still with us today, who had all of that experience and more. But what happened in that moment, of course, is that CMO started, and the vast majority of the team that I had managed for the last few years no longer reported to me. Right? In one day, they transferred over, and probably 70% of the things I was spending my time on didn't really belong to me anymore. Now the CMO was great, really low ego. He said, "Dave, you've been here a long time. You know a lot of things. Let's keep working together really closely on that." But nonetheless, all of a sudden, I was giving away a lot of what I had built. And around that time, I read this article, which had been written by a woman who'd helped scale, I think, Google, and then Facebook, and then Quip, and some other companies. And she gave this analogy of giving away your Legos. And maybe you've heard this before, but she talks about how when you start building a startup, it's kind of like you're coming to a table full of Legos. And you start piecing them together and start building towards what you envision. But pretty quickly you realize that if you want to build what you envision, you probably need more people around the table. And so you go out and find someone. You hire that CMO and invite them to the table with you. But for them to be successful and for the company to be successful in that building, you've got to give them some of your Legos. And and she sort of talked through, and it's a lot of the questions which I experienced at the time, right? Because you sort of have this self-reflection on, well, what if this person comes in and doesn't do it as well as I did? Okay? Or the flip side, which is maybe even a little scarier, what if they come in and do it far better than I did it? And you sort of go through all these sort of questions about yourself and whatnot. And so I've had to give away my Legos a lot of times at Lucid because I'm a generalist. I can build things to a certain point, but it often requires someone with a deeper skill set, more experience to take it to the next level. And so I've done this a number of times over the years. I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it. But it's not easy to give away your Legos. But I think it's one of the key things in figuring out how do you continue to scale as a company is not trying to hoard all of those, but rather invite the right people, partner closely with them, and then figure out, well, what does that mean for me and my next role? What can I uniquely bring to Lucid that still no one else around the table can?
I love that, Dave. So share your Legos, right?
That's right. Give away your Legos.
I love that. And it shows, I'm always impressed when meeting with fantastic leaders like you, because it shows a level of humility, right? Where you say, hey, someone can do this better than me. Let's bring them in. And I love that. Humility is one of the principles we espouse here at RevRoad, and we love that. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that.
It matches up well with one of those core values we established very early on. Teamwork over ego.
Love that.
And so that's very much ingrained in our culture, and I think starts from Carl at the top.
So cool. So cool. What are some leadership principles you rely on as a leader at Lucid? How many employees do you guys have now? Would you say?
We're about 800 employees.
800 employees. Okay.
Spread mostly, mostly in Utah, but have offices in Amsterdam and Melbourne to be our Europe and Asia headquarters, and then some throughout the United States as well.
So wow, it's fantastic. So how do you, as a leader, what are some of the principles you've espoused or learned to do that, to manage that kind of an organization?
Yeah, there are a couple key things that come to mind. One is I always try to keep learning. I've done a lot of different roles at Lucid. I've had my hands in a lot of things, but wow, there is a wealth of knowledge around me now. But to be most effective in my job, I want to be part of that conversation. I want to keep learning. I want to push myself and make sure that I'm pushing the organization in the right way. And so that's certainly part of it, which I think dovetails with the second part, which is, for me personally, and everyone has their different leadership styles, I want to be the kind of person, the kind of manager or leader who's willing to roll up my sleeves with you. If we've got a really hard problem, I'm hoping that we're going to solve that together, and I'm going to help you solve it. I'm not going to say, can you come back in 2 weeks and have the answer, and I'll give you a check mark on it. Right? The hardest problems, I still want to be, really involved in at Lucid, and I think that, because you build a different kind of relationships with the people you're in the trenches with day in and day out. Like that's one of the great things when I look back at my time at Lucid is all these great relationships that have come out of it because we did really hard things together and we built something special together. And no matter how big we get, I want that still to be true.
So cool. Thank you for sharing that, Dave. Okay, we're getting close to time, but I just want to wrap up with just one or two more questions. This is a really cool part of Lucid. Tell us about the kind of capital raises that you've gone through with Lucid. You've kind of alluded to them before, but tell us about the capital raises and then the most recent one.
Yeah, so I walked through some of those, right? I walked through that seed round and the Series A, that followed. I mean, one core principle for us, and again, this is different for different kinds of companies, we've always wanted to be in control of our destiny. And so we have always been pretty disciplined. We've been cash efficient and been, never reliant on that next fundraise. That said, we've been opportunistic about those fundraisers to make sure that we're investing as heavily as we want to and to candidly build some of the branding required, in a big market. And so, essentially every couple of years we've gone through, a different fundraise at one time or another. And,
And Dave, not to interrupt you, but
yeah.
What do you typically use those funds for when you're fundraising? I think that'd be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's the things you would expect. I think we continue to invest heavily in the product. As I mentioned, we launched Lucidspark last year. Right, and so we need obviously a fantastic team around that. With that vision of having every knowledge worker use Lucid products, a lot of it's used on marketing and sales. I've referenced our offices internationally. Right, that's been an area of investment and focus to make sure that we're doing that globally and not just in the United States or English speaking. And so I think those have been kind of some of the key areas that we've invested in over time. But for a tech company, if you look at your P&L, right? Traditionally, if you look at big companies, small companies, 70% or so of your costs are people, right? So ultimately, typically what you're raising money is to be able to invest, in great people. And in terms of so we've had this sort of pattern. Again, that said, we've been pretty disciplined. And so earlier this year, we actually did raise. We put together a big round, and it was a $500 million round on a $3 billion valuation. Now, there's some eyebrows that go up and say, well, if you're cash efficient, why in the world do you need $500 million?
Let's say that number one more time. $3 billion.
That's right. It's even better in slow-mo. Thank you. And, part of that actually, it was entirely actually a secondary transaction, meaning none of that revenue or none of that capital actually was to the balance sheet primarily. But as I mentioned, building a company takes a long time. And so we've had those investors from that seed round who invested 10 or 11 years ago. And our Series A round, who was, 7+ years ago. And, some of them have fund dynamics and they need to actually return capital to LPs and, things of that nature. And so everyone stayed in with the majority of their position, but it gave the opportunity for some investors and some employees to be able to take some off the table while continuing to build for the next stage.
So cool. Thank you. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
That's
you.
A huge, huge feat. Last question. Who was the major player, and since we talked about mentors just previously, who was your mentor throughout this entire journey?
Well, I certainly haven't had just one, but the person who is on speed dial who I call most frequently is still my dad. I grew up watching my dad be this great entrepreneur in sort of different phases of or different areas of his life. I mean, yes, he helped buy and turn around and grow and modernize a big company. But even in sort of the other parts of his life in community settings, he was always sort of very entrepreneurial in how he approached problems. And my mom was side by side with him in doing that. Sometimes in the forefront, sometimes supporting him, backstage, but, she was the sounding board, keeping him grounded, and ideating with him all along. And so, they are my two biggest mentors. I still call them, all the time, certainly about personal things, but oftentimes about, the professional things that are top of mind too.
So cool. Gotta love your dads. All right. Well, let's open it up for a few questions. We probably have time for 2, maybe 3. So go ahead, raise your hand. Wait for the mic runner to bring you the mic so that those online can hear. And let's go through it. Right there in the back.
Hi, I'm Keith. First of all, I want to give you the credit because this July, AJ knows, I show you the idea, one of those crazy kids' ideas. We started with Lucid, had just a crazy concept for an event, and then we went for it. And as simple as that, using Lucid to formalize your idea. And from there, that's how we got our $113,000 first year virtual conference in July.
That's
so
awesome.
I just want to say that product is for real. And for me, as a proud Microsoft Visio user, to actually come and use Lucid, someone laughed. Yeah, there was a lot of pride putting down to say Lucid is actually better.
This is a great plan. Thank you.
There you go.
No, this is unplanned. I just want you to know you actually have a great product there, and we really enjoy it. And I guess my question is, as you are helping all of us accomplishing our dreams, what is the number one key driver to help you to design the product that is actually more geared toward the user? Because a lot of products out there, they are so great and amazing, but to me, it's all good and fancy, but that's not what I need. But I think Lucid really get that just right. It's great, looks much better than Visio, but at the same time gives me the ability to get my job done without going too crazy. So that's my question.
Well, that's a great question. And I think you sort of nailed it in there, which is, from the very beginning, ease of use, right? We focused on that with every product decision, and not just the product decision, but every customer experience decision, right? Our customer touch points, as well. And, that came out very early on, right? I would run surveys of our users, and I would ask them, give me 3 single words that describe Lucid for you. And, every single time when I would make that word cloud, easy would be the number one thing. And that has stayed with us, right? We've been investing in the product for 10 years. There's a lot of power in there. It allows a lot of collaboration, a lot of data, a lot of automation, a lot of deep things. But fundamentally, if we want to reach 1 billion knowledge workers, it's got to be, easy. Thanks, Keith. Good luck.
Right up here up front. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. So my name is Nate Richardson. As a starting entrepreneur, I think my goal is to be able to impact the world as much as I can. And seeing your journey and seeing the company that you've built with the reach that it has, I think something that I've run into personally is a fear of neglecting important things like family, self-care, church service, that kind of stuff. And so I guess my question is, what kind of sacrifices did you need to make to be able to have the reach that you have? And I guess just like what your life balance looked like. What did that, what did you have to expect?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Nate. Boy, it's hard, right, to balance all those kind of key things. And it's really hard to get right. I think from my early on at Lucid, I developed what I called my non-negotiables. And you can't have a very long list of non-negotiables or they become negotiable. But one of the things I talk about with my team pretty frequently is that I'm never going to miss my son's soccer game, for example. Or I now coach my daughter's soccer, or my daughter just started karate, right? I want to be there for all of those special moments, and I'm going to be. And sometimes that's hard. Soccer tournaments, for example, if they're playing on Friday and Saturday, even if it was planned months in advance, they'll get you the schedule about 4 days in advance. And so, but my team knows that I'm going to rearrange my schedule. I'm going to take calls from the field, before the game, not during the game, before the game if I have to make sure that I'm there for those special moments, right? So I think figuring out what your non-negotiables are helps you understand what your balance should be. That said, in the early days, you have this feeling and the knowledge that if I don't do it, no one else is. There's no one else around, right? You're sort of on your own, or at least on your own for that, sort of, domain within the company. And so it's hard to find that balance. And I think for me, there were a couple, key things. One was I saw my parents, as I described, and it it became very clear to me, even though it was subtle, the kind of person I was going to marry. And finding the right partner in life has been, I think, probably the only reason that I've been able to, build and do the things that I want to, because she's been supportive every step of the way. I think second, though, I would figure out what balance looked like for me. And so for me, oftentimes what that has looked like in busy times is, I go to work, I come home at a normal time, we have dinner, I spend time with the kids and with the family, and then when they're all in bed, I'm back on, for maybe a couple more hours sometimes. That's not every night. But that was okay for me. That was sustainable for me. That was sustainable for my wife in our marriage. It was sustainable for our family. That's not sustainable for everyone. And so I think figuring out what does sustainable look like for you, and what are your non-negotiables that you're not going to budge on, sort of no matter what you're trading off.
I love that. Thank you for that response. Great question, by the way. One last question from the audience. We'll wrap up. Lunch is right after this. We don't want to hold everyone too long. Over here, Zach. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it over here. Let's go Zach and then over here. Any regrets? That's the question.
I mean, it's cliche, but it's always hard to have regrets in some respects, right? Because, I look at where Lucid is, I look where my life is, and I think things are pretty darn good. I've watched Back to the Future enough to know that I'm not sure I want to go back and change too many things, in the past. But I think part of it, I would probably say, setting my sights even higher from the beginning. I think for me along the way, my sights have been raised sort of multiple points, and that's okay. But I think had I had the vision and ambition for the company that we have today and the confidence we can reach it in the very early stages, we might have done a few things differently. We might have tried to go faster. We might have hired, more aggressively and done some other things, slightly differently. But I don't lose a lot of sleep over the regrets.
Last question over here.
You talked a little bit about your path and how it's changed over time. What is your role now, and what do you see your most primary responsibility at the company?
Yeah, so, as AJ kind of referred to early on, I've worn just about every hat at Lucid at some point other than writing code. So I can't do that, and I will never try to do that, I don't think. And so, I stay involved in a lot of different parts of the company. I spend most of my time from the go-to-market perspective. So I spend time with our sales and marketing, customer success teams. Again, ultimately, that's part of my passion, and it's also where I think I bring unique value, to help reach that goal of having every knowledge worker use Lucid. I also stay pretty close to, certain things around, the operations, and specifically when it comes to people. It's the part of the business that I probably have come to appreciate more than anything else, given where I started. And so, when we're thinking about people and how do we think about the organization, how do we, retain and develop and recruit, those are conversations that I try to be very close to.
Thanks, Dave. And we really appreciate taking some time. One thing that you may not know is that Dave, he's a fantastic mentor himself. He's been here at RevRoad mentoring a little bit with June at Hollow and many other companies. So we really appreciate that friendship with RevRoad.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's one of the best things that's come from Lucid is having all those different relationships and opportunities to do that.
So cool. Okay, Dave, we're at the last question. Do you know what the question is? What is the one fun thing that your success has allowed you to do?
Well, I think we actually just hit it. And maybe that's be a little bit cliche, but people ask me what my hobbies are. And between work and being there for every family event and all those sort of things, I don't have a lot of hobbies, but one of the things that I love to do is spend time with entrepreneurs, and I'm fortunate to be able to do that because of my path at Lucid. I think people look and say, well, there are some of those things that I can learn from, and I think I can be helpful in some respects as people think through some of those different challenges, whether that be marketing, whether that be people, whether that be operations, whether it be product. Those are conversations I love to have, and so I think maybe the best and unique opportunities that have come from Lucid have just been this network of entrepreneurs that I've been able to build and work with various points over the last 10 years.
So cool. Hey, everyone, give it up for Dave Rowe. Fantastic. We have one little thing for you. Thank you for joining us here at RevRoad, a token of our appreciation.
Awesome. Thank you very much.